Chapter 14 of Murder in the Gunroom. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Murder in the Gunroom by H. Beam Piper. Chapter 14. Neither of them spoke for a moment or two. Then, after they had left the criminological journalistic uproar at the Rivers place behind and were approaching the village of Rosemont, Pierre turned to Rand. "You know," he said, "for a disciple of Korzybski, you came pretty close to confusing orders of abstraction a couple times back there. You showed that Stephen was at home while Rivers was taking that phone call, a little after 10. Aren't you overlooking the possibility that he came back to Rivers after you and Philip Cabot left the Gresham place?" Rand eased the foot pressure on the gas and spared young Jarrett a side glance before returning his attention to the road ahead. "Understand," Pierre hastened to add, "I don't believe that Stephen was fool enough to kill Rivers over that fake North & Cheney. But weren't you producing inferences that hadn't been abstracted from any descriptive data?" "Pierre, when I'm working on a case like this, any resemblance between my opinions and the statements I may make is purely due to conscious considerations of policy," Rand told him. "I don't want Farnsworth or Mick McKenna going around bitching this operation up for me. If they feel justified in eliminating Gresham on the strength of that phone call, I'm satisfied, regardless of the semantics involved. Right now, the thing that's worrying me is the ease with which I seem to have talked Farnsworth into laying off Gresham. He and Olsen both have single-track minds. They may just dismiss that telephone alibi, such as it is, as mere error of the mortal mind, and go right ahead building some kind of ramshackle case against Gresham. Since they picked him for their entry, they won't want to have to scratch him. Damn, I wish I could think of where Walters could have sold those pistols." "Well, if Rivers wasn't involved somehow, why was he killed?" Pierre wondered. "Hey, maybe Walters sold the pistols to Umholtz. He's just as big a crook as Rivers was, only not quite so smart." Rand nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe so, and suppose Rivers found out about it and tried to declare himself in on it. That stuff would be worth at least $10,000. I doubt if whoever bought it paid Walters more than $2. In the Umholtz-Rivers income bracket, the difference might be worth killing for." "That's right, and Umholtz was in the infantry, in the other war. He served in the 28th Division. He was trained to use a bayonet. And he'd picked that short Mauser. It has about the same weight and balance as a 1903 Springfield." "Well, you know, the killer wouldn't need to have been trained to use a bayonet," Rand pointed out. "Mick McKenna made that point this afternoon. There've been a lot of war movies that showed bayonet fighting. Pretty nearly everybody knows about the technique that was used. And against an unarmed and probably unsuspecting victim like Rivers, a great deal of proficiency wouldn't be needed." He slowed the car. "Up this road?" he asked. "Yes, that's my place, over there." Pierre pointed to a white-walled, red-roofed house that lay against the hillside, about a mile ahead, making a vivid spot on the dull grays and greens of the early April landscape. It consisted of a square, two-story block, with one-story wings projecting to give it an L-shaped floor plan. It reminded Rand of farmhouses he had seen in Sicily during the war. "Come on in and see my stuff, if you have time," Pierre invited, as Rand pulled to a stop in the driveway. "I think I told you what I collect: personal combat arms, both firearms and edge weapons." They entered the front door, which opened directly into a large parlor, a brightly colored, cheerful room. A woman rose from a chair where she had been reading. She was somewhere between 45 and 50, but her figure was still trim, and she retained much of what in her youth must have been great beauty. "Mother, this is Colonel Rand," Pierre said. "Jeff, my mother." Rand shook hands with her and said something polite. She gave him a smile of real pleasure. "Pierre has been telling me about you, Colonel," she said. There was a faint trace of French accent in her voice. "I suppose he brought you here to show you his treasures?" "Yes. I collect arms, too. Pistols," Rand said. She laughed. "You gun collectors, you're like women looking at somebody's new hat. Will you stay for dinner with us, Colonel Rand?" "Why, I'm sorry I can't. I have a great many things to do, and I'm expected for dinner at the Flemings'. I really wish I could, Mrs. Jarrett. Maybe some other time." They chatted for a few minutes, then Pierre guided Rand into one of the wings of the house. "This is my workshop, too," he said. "Here's where I do my writing." He opened a door and showed Rand into a large room. On one side, the wall was blank. On the other, it was pierced by two small casement windows. The far end was of windows for its entire width, from within 3 feet of the floor almost to the ceiling. There were bookcases on either long side, and on the rear end, and over them hung Pierre's weapons. Rand went slowly around the room, taking everything in. Very few of the arms were of issue military type, and most of these showed alterations to suit individual requirements. As Pierre had told him the evening before, the emphasis was upon weapons which illustrated techniques of combat. At the end of the room, lighted by the wide windows, was a long desk which was really a writer's assembly line, with typewriter, reference books, stacks of notes and manuscripts, and a big dictionary on a stand beside a comfortable swivel chair. "What are you writing?" Rand asked. "Science fiction. I do a lot of stories for the pulps," Pierre told him. "Space trails and other worlds and wonder stories. Mags like that. Most of it's standardized formula stuff, what's known to the trade as space operas. My best stuff goes to Astonishing. Parenthetically, you mustn't judge any of these magazines by their names. It seems to be a convention to use hyperbolic names for science fiction magazines, a heritage from what might be called an earlier and ruder day. What I do for Astonishing is really hard work, and I enjoy it. I'm working now on one for them based on J.W. Dunne's time theories, if you know what they are." "I think so," Rand said. "Polydimensional time, isn't it? Based on an effect Dunne observed and described. Dreams obviously related to some waking event, but preceding rather than following the event to which they are related. I read Dunne's experiment with time some years before the war, and once, when I had nothing better to do, I recorded dreams for about a month. I got a few doubtful to fair examples, and 2 unmistakable Dunne effect dreams. I never got anything that would help me pick a race winner or spot a rise in the stock market, though. Well, you know, there's a case on record of a man who had a dream of hearing a radio narration of the English Derby of 1933, including the announcement that Hyperion had won." "Which he did," Pierre said. "The dream was 6 hours before the race, and tallied very closely with the phraseology used by the radio narrator. Here." He picked up a copy of Tyrrell's Science and Psychical Phenomena and leafed through it. "Did this fellow cash in on it?" Rand asked. "No, he was a Quaker, and violently opposed to betting. Here." He handed the book to Rand. "Case 12. Rand sat down on the edge of the desk and read the section indicated, about 3 pages in length. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, as he finished. "The idea of anybody passing up a chance like that to enrich himself literally smote him to the vitals. I see the British Society for Psychical Research checked that case, and got verification from a couple of independent witnesses. If the SPR vouches for a story, it must be the McCoy. They're the toughest-minded gang of confirmed skeptics anywhere in Christendom. They take an attitude towards evidence that might be advantageously copied by most of the district attorneys I've met, the one in this county being no exception. What's this story you're working on?" "Oh, it's based on Dunne's precognition theories, plus a few ideas of my own, plus a theory of alternate lines of time sequence for alternate probabilities," Pierre said. "See, here's the situation." Half an hour later, they were still arguing about a multidimensional universe when Rand remembered Dave Ritter, who should be at the Rosemont Inn by now. He looked at his watch, saw that it was 5:45, and inquired about a telephone. "Yes, of course, out here." Pierre took him back to the parlor, where he dialed the inn and inquired if a Mr. Ritter from New Belfast were registered there yet. He was. A moment later, he was speaking to Ritter. "Jeff, for Gawd's sake, don't come here," Ritter advised. "This place is 6 deep with reporters. The bar sounds like the second act of the front page. Tony Ash and Steve Drake from the Dispatch and Express, Harry